Okay, so today for Ancient DOS Games, we're taking a look at Prince of Persia 2: The Shadow and the Flame, the sequel to the original Prince of Persia. And normally I try not to cover games out of order, but I'm making an exception on this one for a couple of reasons. The first is that, well, this is the one I was sent a fully boxed copy of, or at least I think the box has all of its original contents. That's something we're going to get into later. And the other reason is that the original Prince of Persia has been the most requested game for ADG for a while now. Except it's also one of the hardest games to get a legitimate copy of, for more reasons than I can count. So it may be a while, or possibly never, before I get the opportunity. So I figured covering the second game might be a suitable stand-in instead. But now that I've had a chance to play this one, I'm not so certain of that. I actually ran into considerable difficulties trying to play this game, and only got a little past the quarter-way point despite many hours of trying, and despite the game having a hard time limit of only 75 minutes. Yeah, I was having trouble believing the game could be this hard and this inconsistent with a time limit that restrictive, to the point where it was making me question if there was something wrong with the game, something wrong with emulating the game, something wrong with how I was playing, or what. I looked up walkthroughs, I looked up online videos, and even being told what to do and watching what to do, I still had trouble getting anywhere. At that point, I decided to look at a couple of reviews of the game to try and figure out how much of my difficulties were me and how much were the game, and even did a bunch of experimenting. And ultimately I determined is kind of a little of both. The game is actually incredibly consistent once you know exactly how everything behaves and the pixel accuracies involved. But until you are keenly aware of these things and have it dialed into your muscle memory, it all feels incredibly random and arbitrary, and you are going to die repeatedly, over and over again due to the smallest mistakes, constantly having to replay huge sections of the game multiple times. I can effectively sum up this entire experience as trial and error, the game. So does that make the game good or bad or what? Honestly, I can't tell. This is perhaps the very first game I've ever played where I can't tell if the game is good or bad because it runs contrary to how I like to play games. What I can say though is that aesthetically, the game is done exceptionally well. And it's just the raw gameplay which is going to be hit or miss. So I think the best way to get across whether it's good or bad is to just lay out my experience, along with some of the things I had to figure out for myself, and then leave it to everyone watching to draw their own conclusions. Also, I want to quickly mention that there are some graphic death scenes in this game, but I will either be editing around them or censoring things that I can't edit around, so that I don't have to lock away the video or anything. And if anything seems a little weird in terms of how this video is playing out, that's why. Prince of Persia 2 was developed and published by Brøderbund in 1993 and is a one-player cinematic platformer, in that effort's been taken to make the experience feel less like a game and more like you're experiencing a movie that's playing out, as you have to be very particular about the actions you perform, something we've seen in prior games such as Out of This World and Tomb Raider. Now, it only supports MCGA 320 by 256 color graphics and an interesting array of audio devices, almost all of which are capable of producing digitized sound in order to handle all of the dialogue in the game and some of the sound effects, as the sound effects are a mix of digitized and synth effects. As for its current release state, it's still commercial and a royal pain to get copies of. I'm really not sure what insane level of luck was necessary for the person who sent me the copy I have to get it in the first place, but generally speaking, it's fairly difficult to come across copies of this game, and when you do, it's not cheap. Loose copies tend to go for between $35 and $60 depending on condition, and if you're getting the manual or not. Seeing as the game has manual-based copy protection, and fully boxed copies typically break into triple digits, to say nothing of sealed copies. You also have to be very mindful of the platform that you're getting it for, as there's a bunch of different ports, and while you might be tempted to go for the SNES version, given that it's the most common by far, don't. From what I understand, the SNES version's frame rate is through the roof, making it nearly impossible to play without exceedingly fast reflexes. So even though the copy I was sent wasn't sealed, I still want to do an unboxing of this game for a couple of reasons. The first is that it's definitely one of the more unique box designs to ever come out. In fact, it's the exact same shape as the box for the original Prince of Persia, but upside down by comparison. It also doesn't seal in any traditional way. The top just pops right off and gives you access to the contents. So that's something to be mindful of, is that it's very easy for the contents to just spill out, since there's nothing physically stopping this. But before I actually show you the contents of this specific box, I want to show you all my copy of Populous for the Nintendo DS. Now, this is actually a really good version of Populous, and one of the very few DS games to run 60 FPS, so I highly recommend seeking it out if you're a fan of the original Populous. But I also happen to have a Canadian release of it. When I open up this case and take out the extras, you're going to see that I have two manuals, one in English and another in French. And this is actually a fairly frequent thing to run into in Canada, are things being sold with at least some level of dual language going on, even if it's just the manual. Now let's look at the contents of this Prince of Persia 2 box. Right away, I'm 99% certain this is not how it came from the factory, as the 4 discs have been placed in this weird, partially folded envelope. We have a registration card, as was typical for the time, and then we have the manual. 2 of them. And unlike my copy of Populous DS, these 2 manuals are identical. Absolutely no differences between them whatsoever. I have no idea if this is unique to this copy, or if this was a common mistake with box releases of this game, or if whoever was selling this used copy was just being sloppy with their manuals. But regardless, it's amusing, and I wanted to show that it happened just in case there's more to tell which I'm not aware of. I'm going to skip on having a dedicated story section, but the basic gist is that this game takes place only a handful of days following the end of the first game, where the main protagonist had managed to defeat an evil wizard known as Jafar and win the hand of marriage of the princess of the kingdom, thus becoming the new Prince of Persia, as it were. The game opens with Jafar very much surviving his defeat and hatching a new scheme, using his magic to disguise himself as the new prince while returning the real prince into the status of a beggar, even with slightly altered memories so that he knows nothing of his original fight against the wizard. The prince is then forced to escape, with the player playing through this escape sequence, and then following a shipwreck which was totally caused by a natural storm and totally had nothing to do with Jafar, the prince winds up stranded somewhere and the proper gameplay begins, following some copy protection. I should quickly point out though, the part about the altered memories is never expressly stated anywhere, but it's made obvious if you read the story in the manual, as the story there is written in a sort of second-person tone as the memories of the prince in his altered state, following the spell cast by Jafar, whereas the in-game story is narrated from the third person by a narrator. So the gameplay itself, at first glance, seems like it's going to be fairly simple. You have controls for moving left and right, jumping straight up, jumping to the left or right, a crouch button, an action button, and a sword button. However, there's a lot of added complexity to the controls. For instance, if you hold the action button down, you can take careful single steps to the left or right, which is used to inch up to the edge of something safely or into dangerous things without getting hurt by them. Pressing down at the edge of a cliff you're facing away from lets you drop down, while holding the action button lets you stay grasped onto the edge for a moment. And if you draw your sword with the sword button, you're now able to swing the sword with that same button, parry an opponent's attacks with the up direction, or put the sword away with the down direction. So yeah, the controls may seem simple, but they have a lot of intricacies. Also, ironically, just like with Tomb Raider, I was having trouble getting the shift keys to work properly, and I'm fairly certain it was an emulation problem, since if I used DOSBox's keymapper to remap the Z key to act as one of the shift keys, it suddenly worked just fine. Plus, the game was properly detecting when I was holding a shift key. It just wasn't detecting its transition from not pressed to pressed. It's just very odd. But even though the basic gameplay is simple, the actual execution is anything but. The very start of the game gives you a taste of just how unforgiving this experience is going to get, as you start off smashing through a window right up to the edge of the castle. Take just one step towards the edge and you die. Plus, the enemy right here is prepared to strike almost immediately after you land, so you have to get up, turn around, take out your sword, and immediately hit or parry this guy, or else he'll hit you and knock you off the edge into your death all the same. Let this starting section be a taste of what's about to come. You ultimately escape the guards and make a jump onto a boat leaving the docks. And once shipwrecked, you walk around on the beach and come to some quicksand, which will almost certainly eat you up when you first encounter it. Thus, once you figure out how not to run right into it, you'll see some panels appear out of the sand, one of which has a matching symbol to the wall on it. This was originally going to be the copy protection puzzle, but it was ultimately transformed into just a basic puzzle of touching every tile which doesn't have the symbol on it, which opens the path and lets you into your first proper dungeon. Dungeons like this one are where you're going to be spending the vast majority of the game, but with some different environments as you progress through. Now each screen has 3 levels to it, and much of the gameplay revolves around understanding your limits in terms of jumping and falling. To that end, you can survive a 1-story fall without incident, 2 stories will stun you for a moment and cause you to lose 1 health point, represented by the flasks in the bottom corner, and a 3-story fall or greater is immediately fatal. Now if you can climb down the edge of a ledge before dropping, this will afford you 1 more story that you can get down by. You also have to pay careful attention to the floors, as there's 2 very common types of traps in every level. Falling floor tiles, and little holes which shoot pebbles at you when you step on or grab the edge of a floor panel, which triggers it. With the falling floors in particular, sometimes the idea is that you want them to fall. Thus, running over them or jumping anywhere on screen 3 times will cause such floors on the screen to fall entirely on their own. But sometimes the trick is that you don't want this to happen, since the falling floors crashing down can destroy items that you might want, like health potions. The floor panel triggers also have a tendency to control gates, in which case stepping on the panel will cause such a gate to rise, and if the gate is fully risen or coming back down, stepping on the panel again causes it to slam down immediately. The thing to note about this is that these gates are not always on the same screen as the panels which trigger them, so it's very important to keep your ears open in case you touch one of these panels and hear a gate opening, but can't actually see one opening. Now, this first level here isn't quite so bad, and I got through it with relatively little difficulty, but the very next level just ramps that difficulty through the freaking roof. I spent nearly 2 hours straight trying to figure out how to get through this level, and in fact, when the level opens, it presents you with 2 different paths you can take, one to the left and one to the right. As I made my way down either path, I'd face a ton of difficulties requiring a ton of precision, but would ultimately reach a point where it felt impossible to progress any further. However, watching through my footage, knowing what I know now, it actually wasn't impossible to go down either path. The left route brings you into a very nasty battle situation where you absolutely must get the collapsing floor to drop in order to smash the shooter that's in the ground so that you can fight the skeleton properly. While the right route seems like it hits a dead end, but if you were to carefully drop from the edge of the bottom of this screen here, you can reduce a fatal 3-story fall to a stunning 2-story fall and thus still make it to the bottom. Now, either route works, but either route is filled with traps and is massively dangerous. Though the right route definitely feels more possible, though it has this somewhat convoluted door puzzle, the trick to which is to get the doors desynced, so that you can open the left door while the right door is closing, then simply jump to trigger the right door to open. And then you can get through, get the max health potion, and get out before you get trapped. But there's an even simpler route. If you make a couple jumps, you can grab this floating potion and just float down the center of the level, bypassing both the left and right routes. I was intentionally avoiding that floating potion because at the time I thought it was a bad potion, not a good one, just based on what I was remembering from some of the walkthroughs. Yes, you'll miss a max health potion taking this easy route down, but time is not on your side, as once you complete this level, or die on it for your first time, you get a special cutscene, and the hard time limit for the game of 75 minutes now begins. Because of that time limit, and because the game is very stingy in regards to mid-level checkpoints, as in there's almost none anywhere, one particular strategy I would suggest is to immediately save your game when you enter a level for the first time, so that the timer state is saved. Spend a while figuring out how to actually survive that level, see if you can find any secrets, then when you're ready, load up your save to get all of your burn time back, clear the level as best as you can, then repeat this process when you get to the next level. Or if you die without hitting any checkpoints, just reload your save game. Because again, checkpoints are almost nowhere to be found, only showing up in a few places throughout the entire course of the game. And loading a save game always returns you to the state the level was in when you started it, with however much time you had left on the countdown. Though speaking of dying, I actually found out by accident that this game has an exceedingly aggravating quote-unquote feature to ensure the game never ends up sitting idle for too long. See, because the aesthetics in Prince of Persia help to show off what PCs can do, the original game was frequently used to demonstrate new PCs to potential buyers at electronics stores. But that means the game always has to be doing something to ensure it's not just sitting stagnant. In fact, most arcade games have features like this, where a game in progress will simply end automatically if it's left idle too long. Well, at one point, I had just died and decided to get up, use the bathroom, grab something to drink. I was only gone for a couple minutes. But before I got back to my compy, watch what happened. I swear I have not cut a thing. Yeah, after just 1 minute of being idle following a death, the game terminates the run in progress and takes you back to the title and demo sequences. Now, admittedly, this is pointed out in the manual that the game will do this. But freaking why? Did they think people selling computers in the early 90s were too stupid to know how to configure a piece of software for demonstration purposes? Why is this not a command line option which enables this functionality? Why does the game have this needlessly user-hostile feature going by default with no way to turn it off? Yeah, I got a little more paranoid about saving after that mishap. But then I eventually got up to this skeleton on a rickety bridge, and after trying to get past this one part for over an hour, I thought this was where this review was going to end, because I couldn't figure out just the bare basics of what was even going on here. Even the walkthroughs I read online didn't seem to understand what was going on, and watching playthroughs of the game had very different results than what I was experiencing, because in all of those playthroughs, the player was able to fight the skeleton until the bridge collapsed, then get across without issue. But for me, that just wasn't happening. Either I would end up fighting the skeleton forever, since it doesn't have a health bar, or the bridge would indeed collapse, but then I was stuck on the other side with nowhere to go because a door I needed to get through would be closed. The walkthroughs weren't helping and the playthroughs weren't helping, so what the heck was I supposed to do? It was at this point that I was pointed towards a particular review of the game, which clued me in on a couple things and gave me a fresh perspective. The first is that this game's actually more wonky than its predecessor and has a number of moments like this one, where the key to success is to do things in a very specific way, even if that method doesn't seem like it should work. For instance, very late in the game, well beyond as far as I got, there's a moment where you have to die to collect a special fireball power. But the way this plays out makes it seem as though the game's in a state where it's just waiting for you to press a key to return to your last checkpoint. But you actually have to wait for the game to automatically play things out while in this death state without accidentally pressing a key to return to the last checkpoint. Not to mention, I learned I wasn't just crazy. See, there's a particular feature the previous game had, where if you run towards a ledge and hold the jump button down, the game will delay your jump until the last possible moment so that you can leap as far as possible. Even Tomb Raider has this feature, though it had some shortcomings there in that if you were just slightly too far away from a ledge, you'd just jump then and there without approaching the ledge first. The manual for this game says that this same feature is present, but it's not. You have to time your jumps perfectly in this game, and any time you have to make a running jump to survive, it is not pleasant. Back to the skeleton on the bridge though. Once I realized the game was playing dirty, I decided to spend an hour just investigating this one moment, since one of those handfuls of checkpoints happens to be right before this bridge, and I found out a number of things in the process. Firstly, this bridge cannot collapse if you are on the right side of the skeleton. The skeleton must be on the right with the player on the left, which makes sense since where you need to go is to the left. Secondly, while the skeleton is on the left, it will only walk up to a specific point and no further. Thirdly, if you get to the left side of the skeleton too far up the left side of the bridge, the skeleton now ignores you and runs for the right side to hit the floor panel for the door that you need to get through. If this happens, you're pretty much screwed. So, the trick to this bridge sequence is you have to get to the left side of the skeleton without going too far up the left side of the bridge, which is nearly impossible to do through basic combat alone. Thus, after a lot of trial and error, I found a surprisingly consistent way to pull this off. Now first, from the checkpoint spawn, run left until the screen transitions to the bridge, then immediately let go of the controls. Once you come to a stop, wait for the skeleton to go forward as far as it will, then do 2 forward jumps, immediately pull out your sword, and you should be able to reverse to the other side of the skeleton then and there, thus meaning you'll not go far up enough the bridge to trigger the skeleton to run for the other side. From here, you need to attack aggressively, as this tactic works well on all skeletons. Then the instant the bridge starts to break, hold left and the action button together, and you'll grab the left side of the bridge segments which don't collapse. This works pretty consistently, though depending on your attack rhythm on the left side, you may accidentally pull off one attack too many, and if you're in the middle of a sword swing when the bridge breaks, you're screwed no matter what. Or if you accidentally press left too early, this will also prevent you from grabbing the edge properly. But yeah, when I realized the game was being exceptionally evil and precise about this sort of thing, coupled with the insanely short time limit and the lack of checkpoints, I decided it wasn't worth the frustration and aggravation to keep going, as I'd already sunk about 8 hours into it by this point to get through a surprisingly small amount of gameplay. And I captured a little more footage of the next level though, and even discovered that there was very precise timing to dealing with the floating heads, which made them far less of a threat if you had that timing down. But no, I'd now seen this game's true colors and I didn't want any more of it. Overall, I found Prince of Persia 2 to be an exceptionally frustrating experience as far as raw gameplay is concerned. But frustration alone isn't necessarily the mark of a bad game. Well, heck, some people like frustrating games because it pushes them to do better and better. But me personally, I can't stand games like that. Difficult is one thing, but if the difficulty relies on me having to do something precisely correct, or have to burn time doing other things over and over and over and over again just to get chances at doing those difficult parts again, that just drives me crazy. But again, aesthetically speaking, the game is extremely well done. The graphics are very well drawn, the animation is fluid, the music is fitting, and as much as I didn't like the gameplay, the controls were at least very responsive. So no, I didn't like this game in particular, but I understand why people do, and it would still be nice to compare it to the original game someday in the future. Just to see if the gameplay by comparison is a notable upgrade or downgrade. Thankfully, it's also really simple to set up in DOSBox. All you have to do is leave cycle set to auto, and it should run fine, though I never did figure out what was up with the shift keys. So if you're having trouble getting the shift keys to work, you'll want to do what I did and create a custom key mapping for this game so that you can make some other key on the keyboard to utilize one of the shift keys. That or use a joystick or gamepad, but since it's very difficult to pull off standing diagonal jumps with a joystick or gamepad, I'd recommend just sticking with the keyboard controls. Anywho, that'll be all for this episode of Ancient DOS Games, and that's going to wrap up proper ADG videos for the year. 2 Saturdays from now, on December 3rd, will be a quick filler video to fill everyone in on what's been going on and just to let everyone know what to expect for 2023. And then ADG videos will resume next year on Saturday, January 7th. Until then, many thanks to all of you who've been watching the show all this time, many thanks to everyone new who's been giving the show a shot, and many thanks for all the support you've all been giving me, either directly through Patreon or indirectly through likes, shares, and even those Reddit posts I don't know anything about since I'm not on Reddit. As always, I'm going to continue to do my best to bring new videos and content to everyone, real life notwithstanding, and with a little luck, 2023 will go a lot better than the past couple years have. Thanks for watching, everyone, and extra special thanks to everyone supporting me on Patreon. If you'd like to join the ranks of everyone you see here supporting the show directly, head on over to patreon.com/KASICK.